Yes, but unfortunately, there is not one single facet of the civilization of Crete which in the slightest degree resembles the civilization mentioned by Plato in his writings on Atlantis. In addition to that, Santorin blew up and made the explosion which probably caused the plagues of Egypt in BC 1376. That has been decisively dated because an observation of a solar eclipse in that year, which was being made at Ugarit on the Syrian coast, about 40 miles away, was stopped in the middle by the eruption, which burnt the paper on which the observation was being made and destroyed the observatory. Nothing that Gallinopoulos and his friends have been able to put up fits in with anything else as far as Atlantis is concerned. As far as a natural disaster, yes. But the Santorin disaster was not sufficiently important to be noticed in Spain, anywhere in Central Europe, or in northwestern Africa. And had it been of the dimensions assumed necessary to destroy the culture of Atlantis, it would have been remarked elsewhere. The entire Santorin setup has received an immense amount of publicity in the last few years, which I rather think is disproportionate to its value. Because recently the Greek government invited a shipload of scientists and archaeologists to take an excursion round the Greek Isles and to see the Santorin. And several films were produced on it, most of which I have seen. And in general, they were interesting as travel films, but they carried no particular conviction to anybody who had studied the subject in the slightest.
Legend of Lost Atlantis, just a myth, explorer says. Athens, UPI. French oceanographer Jacques-Yves Cousteau yesterday debunked the legend of Atlantis after completing 13 months of underwater archaeological exploration in the Aegean Sea. Cousteau told a news conference aboard his research ship Calypso, "We find the Atlantis myth interesting from a human standpoint, but I believe the story was a model for a future society, not a historic fact. The only text of the legend is in Plato, who was a philosopher and theoretician of the ideal society," he said. "It's amazing how the story has lasted." Archaeologists believe the story of Atlantis, a civilization supposedly submerged in a tidal wave after a natural disaster, may refer to a volcanic exploration on the Greek island of Santorini, Tyra, around 1450 BC, which coincided with the collapse of the Minoan civilization on Crete. "There's nothing to be found off Santorini ever," Cousteau said. "Our divers found everything covered in a thick layer of lava." Cousteau's team made 1,500 dives and spent more than 300 hours underwater during a $1.8 million project to survey and film undersea antiquities in the Aegean.
I tend to adopt the academic approach perhaps defensively, because anyone who devotes himself to the Atlantis problem tends to be written off as a crank, you see, and one could lose one's academic reputation for objectivity and for reasonableness quite easily unless you guard yourself closely. So I've always had to be a bit careful about indulging in speculation. There's nothing really wrong in indulging in speculation, but certain people would think that it wasn't a fit subject for academic study at all, and I've got to show that it is, really.
Do you dream about Atlantis?
No, I can't say that I've ever dreamt about Atlantis. It has always appealed to me in my waking moments, but I'm not conscious about dreaming about it.
Well, it seems that the question of Atlantis' geographical location can only itself be laid to a watery rest, buffeted by the tides of conjecture. But we leave the last word to Edgerton Sykes.
I feel myself that all the manifestations of Atlantis, which people talk about, are only really subsidiary to the main continent itself lying in the Atlantic. And Any other answer, my mind, is a negation of the real facts. Atlantis is exactly where Plato said it was, outside the Pillars of Hercules, and it represents a civilization, culture, earlier than our own, but none the worse for that, and which formed of itself a bridge between Africa and Europe on the one side and America on the other, a concept first put forward by Ignatius Donnelly many years ago.
So the end of this program's exploring, as with so much that concerns Atlantis, finds us right where we started. Along the way, you heard Egerton Sykes, John B. Luce, Dr. Manson Valentine, Hugh Lynn Casey, and James Welland. In our next program, we'll take a look at the other network, New Evidence for an Ancient Civilization. This series was created and produced by Robert Zend, with co-production and direction by Tim Wilson and Len Shear for Radio Canada International. Created and produced by Robert Zend, with co-production and direction by Tim Wilson and Len Shear for Radio Canada International.